Hey guys, welcome back to a new HOA Karen Reddit story. In today's Ripestories video, an HOA Karen thought that she was the sheriff of our neighborhood. She fined us for garbage lids, holiday decorations and kids playing on our own property. Until she crossed the ultimate line by walking into my backyard on Easter to film my children and call the police on us. Let's dive right into the video. Entitled HOA Karen rages over my kids celebrating Easter in our own backyard. The first Reddit story starts like this. So we moved into this neighborhood not too long ago, the first house we ever owned. We rented for years before that, little apartments where you could hear the guy upstairs sneeze. So when we finally closed on an actual house with an actual backyard, we felt like we had won the lottery. And yeah, it's a normal suburban HOA neighborhood, the houses are close together, the lots are kind of small, and everything kind of looks the same. We knew it was an HOA going in. And yep, we are members too, we pay the same dues as everybody else, we read the rules, and none of it seemed too crazy. What nobody tells you when you buy into one of these places is that the rules on paper are not really the problem. The problem is whatever person on the board has decided the rules are a personality. For us, that person was our treasurer. I will call her Doris, not the real name. Doris was maybe in her late 50s, lived 4 houses down and across, and she had this way of appearing. You would be doing something completely normal in your own yard and you would get this feeling on the back of your neck and you would turn around and there she would be, standing at the edge of your property with her phone out, just watching you. Not even waving, not saying hi, just watching and typing. The first week we lived there, I was in the garage unpacking boxes with the door open and Doris walked up the driveway, didn't introduce herself, didn't say welcome to the neighborhood, just nothing. The first words out of her mouth were about the boxes. She wanted to know how long the empty boxes were gonna be sitting in my garage because we have standards about visible clutter from the street. I'd been a homeowner for roughly 4 days at that point, so I just kind of laughed because I thought she was joking with me. But she wasn't. She stood there until I told her I would break them down that night and then she made a note on her phone and left. My wife thought it was funny at first. We both did. Because it kept happening. Our recycling bins were out half an hour too long and we got a written notice in the mailbox. Our kid left a bike in the side yard overnight and we got another one. We hung a little fabric thing on the front door, one of those seasonal ones, you know, with a flower on it, totally normal, and somehow that was a violation of the exterior decor approval process. I didn't even know there was an exterior decor approval process. I'm not really sure anyone did except Doris, who seemed to have memorized the entire rulebook and treated it like scripture. The thing that really got under my skin was that she only did it to certain houses. She had her favorites and she had her targets, and somehow, being the new family with kids, put us firmly in the targets category. There was a couple 2 doors down who had a literal pile of construction debris in their side yard for months and they never got a thing. Meanwhile, I got a notice because my garbage can lid was not fully closed on a windy day. I'm not even exaggerating here. Seriously, we have 3 kids, they are young, school age, the kind of age where they have an enormous amount of energy, and the only acceptable way to get rid of it is to let them run around outside until they are tired enough to fall asleep. We bought a house with a backyard specifically so they would have a place to do that. That was the whole point, you know. That was the dream we had been saving for. Doris hated that backyard like it had personally wronged her. Every time the kids were out there, she would materialize at the back fence. And yeah, my youngest is loud, I will own that. He's a loud little kid, but he's a kid in his own yard in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday. The first time Doris complained about the noise, my wife went out and talked to her all polite, and Doris told her that the neighborhood had a reasonable enjoyment clause and that our kids playing was interfering with her reasonable enjoyment of her property. My wife pointed out that it was 2 in the afternoon, and Doris said 2 in the afternoon was when she liked to sit on her patio. So yeah, we started keeping them inside more, and honestly, I hated that. I genuinely hated that we had bought this house so they could play outside, and now we were keeping them inside because some woman down the street could not stand the sound of children. But we did it because we were new and we didn't want to be those neighbors, you know, the ones everybody whispered about. We figured if we just kept our heads down and were polite, she would eventually find someone else to bother, and she didn't find someone else to bother though because we were the bother and the holidays were the worst for this. I don't fully understand it, but every single holiday seemed to set her off worse than normal. 4th of July, the kids had little sparklers in the backyard, the dollar store kind, you know, and she called an emergency line on us claiming we were discharging fireworks. It was sparklers! We had to explain to a very bored cop that no, there were no fireworks, it was just 3 kids waving sparklers their mom was holding the lighter for. Halloween, she complained that our decorations were frightening and asked the board to make us take them down. We had a plastic skeleton. You gotta imagine, one plastic skeleton sitting in a lawn chair, and by the time spring rolled around, we were honestly exhausted by all of this. Every weekend felt like we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, and my wife actually started checking out the back window before she let the kids outside to see if Doris' blinds were open, because if they were, that meant she was home and watching. And honestly, guys, that sounds not like a house, but more like a prison, and I'm feeling so bad for OP. And if you were in this situation, how would you have reacted to all of this crap? How would you have handled this? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, let me know where you are watching from today, and if you could like the video, that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for the support. Anyway, that is a messed up way to live in the house you saved for years to buy. We talked more than once about whether buying here had been a mistake, which brings me to Easter. The kids were so excited about Easter this year. We did the whole thing, you know, dyed eggs at the kitchen table the night before, made a huge mess, the older two arguing about whose egg was the prettiest, while the youngest just dunked his hand straight into the cup of blue dye and walked around looking like a smurf for like 2 days. It was great. It was exactly the kind of thing we had wanted when we bought the house. My wife and I stayed up after they went to bed, hiding plastic eggs all over the backyard behind the planters, in the little fork of the tree balanced on top of the fence posts, and yeah, we hid a ton of them, and we went a little overboard, honestly. There was candy in some of them, little toys in others, and we had gotten these special golden eggs that had dollar bills folded up inside that the kids didn't even know about, so finding one was gonna be a big deal. Either way, Easter morning the kids found their baskets, did the whole thing, and then we told them the yard was full of hidden eggs, and you would have thought we had told them we were going to Disneyland. They were vibrating. We let them tear into the backyard and start hunting while my wife and I went into the kitchen to get the food going, because we were having a little family lunch and there was a ham in the oven and a whole spread to put together, so here's the part that matters. We were in the kitchen window looks out over the backyard so we could see them through the glass the whole time, the 3 little maniacs sprinting around the yard shrieking every time they found an egg. They were having the best morning of their lives, and this went on for maybe 20 minutes. My wife was on the deviled eggs, I was carving stuff, and we were both kind of half watching the kids and laughing at them through the window. At one point my middle kid found one of the golden eggs, and the scream of joy was loud enough that we heard it clearly through the closed window, and both cracked up. And then I looked up and Doris was in my backyard. Not at the fence, not on the sidewalk. She was in my backyard. She had apparently come through the side gate, the one we kept latched but not locked, walked across my grass, and she was standing in the middle of my Easter egg hunt with her phone up, filming my children. My kids had stopped running. They were standing there, the 3 of them, frozen, looking up at this strange angry adult who had appeared in their yard, and even through the glass I could see the youngest one's face starting to crumple because he was scared. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. I dropped a knife, my wife dropped a spoon, and we both basically came through the back door at the same time. And by the time we got out there, Doris was already mid-rant telling my 8-year-old that he needed to lower his voice, and that this kind of disturbance is not acceptable in this community. While she was standing on my property, the property she didn't own, that she had walked onto without permission, filming my children. I got behind her and the kids and I told my wife to take them inside, which she did, scooping up the youngest who was crying now and herding the other 2 through the door. And then it was just me and Doris standing in my backyard surrounded by hidden eggs. "You need to get off my property," I told her. I was trying really hard to keep my voice level because the kids could still hear through the door and I didn't want to be screaming. "Right now, you walked into my yard, you don't get to do that." She didn't even flinch though, she kept the phone up, now pointed at me, and she said, "I'm documenting an ongoing noise violation. Your kids have been disturbing the peace of this entire street for the better part of an hour." "It is Easter," I said. "They are hunting eggs in our backyard, behind a fence. Get out of here." And here's the line that I'll remember for the rest of my life. She lowered the phone just enough to look at me directly and she said, "I'm the treasurer of this HOA. I have every right to be here." I almost laughed. I really almost did, because that is such an insane thing to say. Being the treasurer of an HOA does not make you a cop. It doesn't even make you a code officer. It does not give you the right to walk through someone's gate and onto their grass and property and film their kids. It just means you handle the money for the people who pay for landscaping. That's it, really. That is the whole job. But in her head, over all these months and years of nobody ever telling her no, she had convinced herself that she was law enforcement, that the rule book was a badge, that she could go anywhere and do anything because she was on the board. You have no right to be here, I told her. This is my property and I'm telling you to leave. She actually smiled at that. She liked that. She dialed 3 numbers and put the phone to her ear. She was calling the cops on my kids on Easter. I could hear her side of it. She told the dispatcher that there was a severe ongoing disturbance. She probably means herself, and that there were unsupervised children creating a hazard and that she felt unsafe. She had walked into our yard. How can she feel unsafe? We hadn't even raised our voices at her, and my kids were inside crying. And she's telling 911 that she feels unsafe because an 8-year-old found a chocolate egg. I'm not gonna lie, in that moment my stomach just dropped because I genuinely thought she might win. That's the thing about people like her. They do this stuff so confidently that some part of you starts to believe they must know something that you don't, and she was so sure about it. She stood in my backyard with her chin up like she was about to be proven right in front of God and everybody, and I stood there thinking the cops were gonna show up and somehow side with the woman who thinks she's the sheriff of the cul-de-sac. My wife came back out having gotten the kids settled inside with the TV on, and she stood next to me. She had already called an emergency police line herself to report Doris for being on our property, so now there were apparently 2 calls going on about the same address, which I'm sure made the dispatch stay. We waited, Doris waited, the eggs sat there in the grass, nobody hunted them anymore. It was the most awkward 15 minutes of my life, the 3 of us standing in a backyard in total silence, 2 of us by the back door, and Doris planted in the middle of the lawn refusing to move, all of us waiting for the police to come settle it. When the squad car pulled up out front, Doris practically lit up. She walked on her own back through the side gate around to the front to meet them, which I was honestly relieved about because it got her off my grass, and my wife and I followed. 2 officers got out, a younger guy and an older one, and Doris went straight at them, talking fast, phone already up to show them her video. "Officers, I'm the treasurer of the homeowner association here, and I've been trying to address a serious disturbance. These people have completely unsupervised children, making noise that is affecting the entire neighborhood, and when I tried to address it, the homeowner became aggressive with me." I want you to understand how confident she was. She told that story like it was the truth, and she had no doubt in the world that these officers were gonna nod along and write us a ticket. The older officer let her finish, then he looked at me and my wife and asked real simple, "Who lives here?" "We do," I said. "This is our house, we own it." He looked back at Doris. "And where do you live?" "4 houses down," she said. "But as treasurer, I'm responsible for—" "So you don't live here?" he said. Not a question, but a statement. He let it sit there for a second. "And you were in their backyard." "I was documenting a violation," Doris said, and you could hear the first little crack in her voice. The first tiny moment where she realized this might not be going the way it always went. The younger officer had walked over to the side gate and looked into the backyard, where there were very obviously a few dozen plastic eggs scattered around and 0 hazards of any kind. He came back and kind of murmured something to his partner. The older officer turned back to Doris and his whole tone had changed by now. "Ma'am, did you enter their property today?" "I had every right to, I'm on the board." "That's not what I asked. Did you walk onto their property, through that gate?" "Yeah, but—" "Did they invite you onto their property?" "That's not the point. There was a disturbance and—" "Did the homeowner ask you to leave?" Doris' mouth opened and closed. And here's where she made it so much worse for herself though, because instead of doing the smart thing and saying, "Yeah, officer, I'll go home now," she dug in. She actually did. She said, "I don't have to leave. I'm the treasurer. I have the authority in this community and I'm not gonna be intimidated to—" "You don't have authority over their backyard," the officer said. "Nobody on an HOA board does. You entered private property you don't own, you were asked to leave, and you refused. I'm telling you now officially that you need to go home. Do you understand?" And she said no. She said, and I will never forget this, "No, I will not be told what to do by people who have no respect for this community. I'm within my rights and I'm not leaving until this situation is properly handled." There was this little pause where I think even the cops could not believe this. The older officer kind of tilted his head like he was giving her one more chance to be a normal person. He said, "Ma'am, I'm directing you to leave this property and return to your home. If you refuse, I'm going to have to place you under arrest for trespassing. This is your last warning. Go home." And Doris, treasurer of the HOA, queen of the cul-de-sac, the woman who had spent months making my family feel like criminals for just existing, crossed her arms and said, "I'm not going anywhere." I've replayed that moment in my head probably 1,000 times. The way Doris's face changed when the younger officer actually stepped forward and said the words, "Turn around, put your hands behind your back." The way she suddenly went from, "I have authority in this community," to, "You cannot do this, do you know who I am? This is harassment." In the span of about 4 seconds, they handcuffed her. The exact thing she had been threatening other people with for years, the police, the consequences, the public shame, all of it landed on her, and it landed because she literally couldn't bring herself to walk 4 houses down the street and go inside her own home. By this point, I should mention that we were not the only ones watching. It was Easter, so it was a nice day, and the second a squad car shows up in an HOA neighborhood, every single window on the street suddenly has a face in it. People had drifted out onto their porches, the couple across from us was straight up standing in their driveway, not even pretending not to look, and every one of them got to watch Doris get walked to the squad car in handcuffs, still arguing, still telling the officers that they were making a huge mistake and still saying the word treasurer like it was gonna save her. They put her in the back of the car and the older officer came over to me and my wife and was honestly really decent about it. He told us that we hadn't done anything wrong and that our kids playing in our own fenced backyard was completely legal, and that she'd been told multiple times to leave and simply chose not to, and that what happened to her was entirely on her. He took a quick statement, asked if our kids were okay, and told us we could probably expect to be contacted later, but that we didn't need to worry about it for the rest of the day, and then they left. I'm gonna keep the legal side short because honestly it was not dramatic and I don't want to make it sound like some big thing. She got charged with trespassing, it was a minor thing, but it was real, it was on paper and it was on her record now, and we didn't even have to push for any of it. We simply talked to the officers, we said our piece, and after that it kind of moved along without us having to do much at all, and we were not out for blood either. We just wanted her to leave us alone and that part took care of itself. The bigger consequences were the social ones and those were the ones that actually mattered. See, the thing about Doris is that she'd been running her little reign of terror on the assumption that she had the whole neighborhood behind her, that she was the law and everyone respected her for it. What she found out the hard way though, in handcuffs in front of everyone, was that nobody respected her at all. They were simply scared of her. And the second she got walked to that squad car, the spell broke for the entire street. It turned into a whole thing at the next HOA meeting, which we actually went to for the first time, because before that we had avoided them out of pure dread. There was a real conversation about the board and about how much unchecked power one person had been allowed to have. Doris was not the treasurer for much longer. You cannot really keep someone on the board after they've been arrested for trespassing onto a member's property while harassing that member's kids on holiday. Even an HOA has limits apparently. Who knew? And yeah guys, honestly, I'm so sick of these HOA board members thinking they are like the FBI or something. I mean, being the HOA treasurer means that you balance the books and collect dues. It doesn't give you probable cause to enter private property, and it certainly does not give you the right to film other people's children on private property. The fact that she called the cops and claimed she felt unsafe by seeing an 8-year-old hunting Easter eggs is peak Karen. She thought she was untouchable because nobody had ever told her no before. And a user from Reddit said, as a former HOA board member, this is exactly why people hate us. The bylaws almost certainly state that board members do have a right of easement for common areas or very specific utility maintenance, but absolutely none of them allow you to walk into a resident's fenced backyard to police noise. Doris fell victim to the classic small amount of power goes straight to the brain syndrome. If she wanted to find them, she would have logged a complaint and let the management company handle it, but going rogue and trespassing on Easter is a fast track to getting the association sued. The board did the right thing by stripping her of her title immediately. Another Reddit comment said, "This just makes my blood boil. We bought our house specifically so our kids could have a yard, and if some neighbors started hovering at the fence every time they giggled, I would lose my mind. Kids are allowed to exist, and kids are allowed to play outside on a holiday morning. The fact that OP's wife felt like she had to check the windows to see if Doris' blinds were open before letting the kids out is heartbreaking. No one should feel like a prisoner in a home they spent years saving up to buy." And the next one is a fantastic story about a crazy neighbor, and it is titled "Neighbor Self-Owns by Calling Code Enforcement on Himself." So we bought our house like 4 years ago, and during those showing inspections, appraisal and approval by the city, no one said anything about the neighbor's fence that spanned from the front right corner of his house, if looking at them from the street, across his driveway with a gate to the front left corner of my house. This effectively blocked me from accessing a 30LX4W strip of my own property. It was all grass that he mowed. Later that year in November, I noticed a tiny bit of water seeping into the basement on that side of the house. We had just gotten through our third historic once-in-100 years rainfall of the year. A quick ocular pat-down of that side of the house showed a slight slope towards my house. I planned to hire someone in the spring to slope it away and install a French drain so I didn't flood his driveway, like a good neighbor, you know. Well, the next spring I hired the crew, they went over and started working. The neighbor, a 60-ish-year-old who looks 80 according to my wife, came out all hot, screaming at these guys, wondering what they were doing on his property. Mind you, I'd never had an issue with a siding repair who accessed that same site, or the cable guy or a plumber who all accessed that site many times before, but he gave him a hard time for a few minutes. They blew it off and thought he had been day drinking. They slope, tilled, mulched, and left a nice flower bed for future use. The next year, last year, I planted some roses in the bed and hired out a company to do a whole yard clean out. They got to that side to pull weeds and lay fresh mulch, and the old man came screaming out of his house telling them to get off his property. He even took a half-assed punch/swipe at one of the guys, calling them all dirty Mexicans. These guys were white, so that made no sense either. I came out and he started yelling at me, saying they were messing up his yard and he wanted me to pay to resort. I said no way. He called me a bitch over and over again, and I told them to ignore that side. I spoke with my wife and we both agreed if he wants to be a dick, we will just be petty and let that overgrow so he can look at it. You cannot really see it from the street, so I didn't really care. The weeds were like 4 foot tall by the end of the summer. This spring was wet, so the weeds were knee-high by the start of May. I was outside mowing when he came out the fence, got in my face and asked, "When are you gonna clean this crap up?" I said, "When I have assurances that you won't harass me or the workers, then I will clean it up." This upset him. He started calling me a bitch over and over again. He even threw in the word lazy for good measure, and I said, "Call of the city," and ignored him. He turned his attention to the other neighbors and started raising holy hell with them. My house, while older, is well maintained and carefully landscaped. His house has aluminum siding from the 80s. He doesn't edge any of the walks or driveways, and he has old aluminum awnings that are filthy. His back patio has tall weeds between the pavers, and I say nothing about it. I mean, it's not mine, and honestly, he's keeping values down enough that the tax man did not raise my rates, so I just don't care. But the next day, code enforcement knocks on my door. He called. The guy said, "I'm not sure why I'm here. I see no weeds. You have a nice home. Can you show me where he thinks these weeds are?" So we went to the side of the house. Code enforcement sees his fence blocking my access. Welp, nothing I can do to you, but he has 10 days to remove that fence. He also needs to weed his patio and edge the sidewalk. The next morning, his wife came over and asked if I would split the cost of removing the fence, and I said, "Sorry, but us bitchs are out of charity money this week." Now there's an old man sweating in the heat removing the fence, and I can hear him calling his kids to come help because their old man couldn't keep his mouth shut. He could at least tolerate someone in his grass to make it look nice, but no. Well, tomorrow, now that I have access, I'm removing those roses and putting them somewhere I can enjoy them. The mulch will be removed and I will lay down some landscaping plastic and cover the whole thing in pea gravel. You wanna be a dick? Fine, look at the crappy side of my house. And the next one is an interesting malicious compliance story which is titled, "Well, that is the seasoning you asked for." So for context, my dad and I love to cook, so we tend to have a good variety of ingredients, especially herbs and spices. When I was in, I want to say middle school, we discovered garlic powder and we used it on almost everything that it could possibly taste good on. To my annoyance, my mom insisted on calling it garlic salt, even after I explained several times that that's a different seasoning. But finally, I had my dad pick up a shaker of actual garlic salt and waited. Eventually, my mom asked me to bring her the salt, pepper and garlic salt for whatever she was eating, so I did just that, and when she inevitably asked why her food was so salty, I explained to her that I brought her exactly what she asked for, meaning salt, pepper and garlic salt. She never called it garlic salt again, and I felt so satisfied with my smart assery. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you again tomorrow.